Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today's conversation focuses more on the capital side of defense and national security innovation, how investors think, what they underwrite, and where they believe the real opportunities are. My guest today is Jeff Crusey, general partner at IceNine, an early-stage venture firm investing in defense, space, deep tech companies from first check onward. Jeff spent the last 2 decades moving between founder and investor seats, also operator, very operated grounded view into venture in this market. So Jeff, it's great to have you as a guest and thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, David.
All right. Well, I think easy just to set the landscape for everyone is if you could talk a little bit about your background, personal journey, what pulled you into both defense as well as investing?
Yeah. So I've spent my whole career back and forth between sort of deep tech startups and VC. I originally focused on biomedical technology, but because I came from a family of doctors, but very quickly figured out I'm the black sheep and I was more interested in energy tech back in 2008. So I made what appeared like a weird decision to all my friends and family to move to Detroit in November of 2008, but it was pretty intentional. I didn't think Silicon Valley had a great clue of how to invest in energy tech at the time. Got to reboot the corporate venture arm of a utility where our largest customers are the auto OEMs. We owned a lot of gas assets. We could see competition better. We could even deploy technology through our development arm as well. So that was my first segue into venture capital and investing. And I love the work, but eventually, I realized I'm not really technical and I'm not really operational. So I felt like I wasn't able to give founders much good advice yet and wanted to spend the next decade or so getting all that experience. So ended up working on a bunch of different stuff, including more technical and operational roles focused around things like photovoltaics, semiconductor tooling design, micro LED displays, optics and stuff for AR, VR. Dabbled in AI, in ad tech for a bit, even co-founded a headset company with some colleagues of mine at one point. Didn't go anywhere. But that was what accidentally took me into space and defense, many years ago. That was because the computer vision we were developing turned out to be more useful for finding bad guys using drones. And off I went to Viasat, where I was working on, ISR missions, but also on the space side, helping redesign some things like antennas and also do some corporate development. And so it took me a little bit deeper into defense. I also helped my brother get his company off the ground. They were originally known as Earth Observant, also known as EOI, which was a very low Earth orbit imaging company. So worked closely with the DoW on that. And then eventually jumped back to the dark side in VC, where I joined a firm called Sarah from Space for a bit out here in London before I spun out on my own. Started writing some early checks into companies like Castilian, True Anomaly, and a handful of others. Also went operational on the defense side. So I work with a company called Black Lake. And basically what we do is we help accelerate a lot of emerging defense companies in various ways. Not like a traditional accelerator does, but so, we've done things like one spot on the Shield IDIQ, so we can help a lot of my portfolio companies as well as other emerging companies get onto that. And, just delve further and further into this, challenge of defense, because I think with the nature of war having changed so dramatically and so rapidly, we need to come up with new technologies and ways to just acquire it and deploy it in a timely manner so we can sort of address these challenges as they come to us in the field.
Very cool. What a journey. And it's still going.
Absolutely.
So, going back and forth between kind of founder operator roles to investor roles, which side do you think taught you more about building real companies? I'm always curious with VC, a lot of times you just have these advisors who actually haven't operated, but you've got both sides. Kind of give me the yin and yang of that perspective and where you think you pull the most value.
Cut my teeth as an operator in startups for sure. That's where I learned the most. And it's probably because you learn hard lessons the hard way, right? You bump your head against the wall. You're not going to forget those things. And it's compounding learning and it's very rapid too. I wouldn't say it's the same in VC. You're kind of once removed, you're at a 10,000 foot level. And it's hard to sort of dig into and get in the weeds with a lot of startups from that perspective. And, like a lot of VCs, like I said, they aren't operational from this industry or they don't have the technical backgrounds to sort of help these founders be strategic. So that's really why I wanted to go, dig into that, for a good portion of my career before I came back to investing.
Yeah, it makes sense. You've said before, fail we may, sail we must. So in deep tech investing, you know, what does it look like when a bet goes wrong?
Oh yeah. I mean, it can go wrong in spectacular fashion, honestly, because it's hard. It's not like software, right? Like you'll set a design and to some degree you kind of have to go with it and you know, you hopefully made the most informed design decisions you could make along the way. But if it doesn't ultimately work exactly the way you predicted it would, I mean, hardware can be challenging. That's why you got to blow up rockets over and over and over again before you get it right. And it does take a certain level of resilience to stomach that. And it's not the same with software. So, I have a lot of respect for founders that are in the more hardware category for that reason.
Dan, how have you seen? Because you've been in the middle of this. I mean, I go back maybe 5 years ago, probably 10, definitely. You know, hardware and defense tech was not a sexy investment. There was not a lot of private capital, and that has made a massive shift, thanks to the likes of Andreal, Palantir, different things like that. But talk to me about that, how you've seen it from that perspective. What's been some of the drivers, and how do you think this is going to all play out?
Yeah. I think a lot of this really traces back to mid to late 2000s actually. And I saw it up close when I was at DTE Energy Ventures investing in energy tech. Every VC in the United States wanted to invest in solar panel manufacturing companies. I remember Solyndra, if anybody remembers that company, got hundreds of millions in loan guarantees, blew up in spectacular fashion, didn't go anywhere, and it was very obvious to me that was going to happen. That was because on the day I was talking to the company, I could go online and buy Chinese solar panels cheaper than they would ever be able to produce, and so they're dead in the water. And that that concerned me not for the investment. That concerned me for American competitiveness long term, because what that meant was we were giving up our technical advantage. And if we're giving up our technical advantage, I also believe at the time they were giving up part of our national security along with that too. And that would spell, dire consequence. There would be dire consequences for that down the road. So I think the reason I'm explaining this is because I think a lot of what we're experiencing today in this dramatic shift away from software to hardware in the VC world is really paying for those sins back in the 2000s for having our heads in the sand and letting those industries go overseas. Now we're trying to recoup a lot of that, and defense has always played a large role in pushing the innovation curve forward. A lot of people don't like me saying this, but war is probably the best motivator of innovation there is. We see more innovation during those periods than we ever have. I mean, World War II is a simple example of that. So I think, we have a lot of catch up we have to do right now to, get, you know, rare earths and critical minerals under control, less dependent on foreign suppliers. We need to do things like we really need to shape up our energy grid, especially in the face of AI. If we're going to try and win this race, we need to fix that yesterday. So I think we have a lot of catch up to do. I am optimistic. This isn't me being negative on the US. I'm optimistic because Americans consistently step up to those challenges. So I don't think, I know we're going to be fine, but we need to really put our foot to the gas because now it's not about having IP. It's about the speed of your IP and how quickly you can innovate as compared to your competitor. And we've got a strong competitor now in the technology world. And so we've got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Well, it is interesting when you have, we use other countries that it's state-driven capital, right? It's not private capital. And now you've got LPs or investors that are trying to join in, but the return on the investment is very different than software. Like the software model is poof, you get the hockey stick and off we go. But we have seen some spectacular returns, from some of these companies that are, come out of stealth and they're unicorns already. How is the investor and their desire for that ROI to see that playing out? Is it tough to raise capital, or are folks fired up about this?
I think folks are pretty fired up about it, honestly. At one point, I was watching AI valuations go toe to toe with defense valuations, which I could not have predicted in my life. But I think that just shows how much focus and how much concern there is by not just, our military, but also by, the private sector that wants to support them in this. So I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, because the second you let your guard down, it doesn't matter if you have software anymore, that'll belong to somebody else. So again, one of the many reasons I'm optimistic that we're going to be fine, but we got work to do.
Absolutely. And how much do you think the DOW's, or the government at whole, approach to acquisition is helping, fueling it, constraining it? Like, what's your perspective on that?
It's still early days. I think there's a lot of modulating we're going to have to do to sort of, optimize that system. But I think Secretary Hegseth said it right. Speed is key here, and we can't let that kind of inertia prevent us from rapidly developing capabilities and acquiring and deploying them. I think the good news is there are lots of great examples of that, like SpectreWorks. I don't know if you've heard about these guys, but 8 months ago, they were in a Pentagon courtyard showing off their what is like a Shahed, replica basically. But within eight months of them showing this off to Hegseth, they're in field. Like 8 months, like from intro to being utilized. That's a new US. That's a new military. That's a new USA right there. So I think we've got a lot of good signals that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I know Spectra works well. We'll just say they're partners of ours.
Amazing.
Are you invested in them, or?
I'm not. I mean, the I think the coolest part of their story is their bootstrap.
Yeah, they're doing amazing things. Small team.
Exactly. And I really do think, small teams that understand physics and engineering better than their competitors can make big impacts, really big impact. And I think this is just one of those examples. You don't need to be a $60 billion, you know, f- multi-unicorn to put out good technology. And this is an example.
Yeah, I mean, historically, based on some of my time in the defense industrial base, it's the SMBs, the small businesses, especially when fueled with some capital. That's where the innovation, they're not bogged down by bureaucracy, right? They've got the ability to pivot quickly, to try things out. If they've got the right backing, allowed to fail fast. And so I agree 100% with you. Let's pivot a little bit to, like, just specifically ICE9. What is your investment thesis? And explain this to someone who doesn't live necessarily in the defense or national security ecosystem.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I was consistently encountering when I talked to founders was the complaint about the investors not really understanding their technology or their business, not really understanding the industry. And eventually, when investors had, a large percentage ownership in their business, would often take it off the rails strategically and not for good reason. And I've seen it over and over again in many different industries over the years, but mostly within these hard tech categories. And what I realized at some point was, a lot of these investors were trying to apply a SaaS or software playbook for investment to hard tech. And that model, that playbook just doesn't apply to a lot of hard tech categories. And so there was just this mismatch of capital. And when that became clear to me that it was sort of a consistent pattern over time, and it wasn't just in energy tech, I've seen it in defense tech as well. I decided that that's when I needed to launch IceNine, because founders don't need a SaaS playbook. They need lived experience. They need first principle technical understanding, and they need embedded networks. And that's really what accelerates founders in addition to the money. And founders just weren't getting that. And I wanted to deliver that because I had in the past. And I'm really founder focused. I'm kind of a self-loathing VC. I don't really care what other VCs think. You know, their opinion's theirs, and that's great. I like to write first checks, get in early, and then, be an operator investor and a real resource to the founders.
As someone who relies on investors, I love that thesis. that perspective, if you will. What is ICE9? Like, what's the name significance?
Yeah, it comes from a Kurt Vonnegut novel, actually. He wrote a book, Cat's Cradle, and it's a pretty funny and satirical book, actually. But in the book, there's this U.S. government scientist that invents this crystal called ICE9, And it was designed so you could take this crystal and put it into mud, and it would raise the freezing temperature of the water in the mud to room temperature. So it instantly freeze. And so you could drive your trucks over it, no problem, wouldn't get stuck in mud. The only problem is all water is connected, whether it's vapor or liquid in the world. So if this thing freezes, a lake, everything's going to start to freeze over. So we can't let this crystal get out. So he breaks it up, gives it to his three kids, and hides it, and all hilarity ensues. But the lesson that I think Kurt Vonnegut's trying to telegraph to his audience is that it's not the evil guy with his finger over the red button that's the real danger. It's the careless misuse of technology that's the real danger, and we need to be really responsible about that. And that's something I try and carry over into the work I do, and try and be responsible about what I'm investing in. And that doesn't prevent me from investing in weaponry at all. But it does prevent me from investing in things like a consumer app, which I don't think we need. I want to focus on things that we actually need.
What a great story. I love it. And especially appropriate in the time of AI, the horror stories, just like, oof, it's not malintent necessarily, but technology in the wrong hands can definitely get squirrely quick.
I mean, in ways that I don't even know that we can imagine right now.
Yeah. So you mentioned you write first checks. That's oftentimes pre-product. What signals are you underwriting? Like, how do you make that decision? What's the thing that's like, they deserve some of our money?
Yeah, so I usually start long before I actually talk to those companies doing thesis development. So what I'm trying to understand is how a specific area of technology is going to evolve over time. And once you kind of start to understand that, you can sort of get some sense for where it's likely to go. And that gives me an idea for which companies, the market will bear. And so typically, I'll be doing that research continuously in the background all day, every day to try and, surface a profile of those companies. So when I find that profile, I'll start scanning the horizon to see if I can find them. Most of the time I can find them. Sometimes I can't. So I've done some incubation in the past. But if I am able to find a team, a lot of it isn't that different in terms of heuristics from what a lot of VCs talk about, but I think I put a bit of a finer point on it. So, when I'm pretty tech first, honestly. I want to make sure that, it's not, it's the right tech at the right time, developed the right way. I'll scrutinize the heck out of unit economics. I don't want, a $10 million missile. That's not what we're trying to do these days. And, same for energy. Like a lot of times, like they have these great, you know, fission, reactors, but it's producing electricity at $10 a kilowatt hour. That's not going to do anybody any good. So technology is a really important aspect of it. Team is a hugely important aspect of it because the quality of execution can vary vastly depending on the complementary skill sets on the team. So I'm always looking for that unfair advantage on the team that can come in a lot of forms. That can come in, in the form of technical insight and scaling ability, relationships within the US government, things like that. But I'm always looking for that unfair advantage within the team. And that usually sits across the team as well. I don't think teams that are just technical and don't always do well. You need to have some sort of balance in terms of the ability to commercialize that technology. So that's another sort of thing I typically look for. And then I'm not one of these people that's like, there's got to be a $20 billion market. Oftentimes, these companies don't even have a market when I'm talking to them. I have to have some idea that it can be a big market in the future. And a lot of that just comes from, lived experience talking to my embedded networks in those industries. So I can sort of put the tapestry together of whether or not I think that, there's a large outcome on the other side of this business.
Share one of your best, if you don't mind. I'd be curious, like, where did you build this thesis where there wasn't a market, you found the right team, and now there's a market?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, yeah, I incubated a fusion company a little over a year ago. And this was one of those ones where I was doing my thesis development. I wasn't satisfied with any of the designs of the fusion reactors that were out there today. I think they all have these endemic issues. And I hadn't really seen anybody make an attempt at solving some of these issues in this one particular area of fusion. I couldn't find the company. So I just went and started talking to my nuclear physicist friends to see if I was, crazy for thinking in this direction.
All of your nuclear physicist friends, I mean, said no one.
Well, actually, I grew up in San Diego where they've got a fusion development lab. My mom used to drop me off at when I was a kid, so I knew a few of them. And we got talking, and they're like, no, this isn't a crazy idea. We've actually started noodling on this exact idea already. And so very quickly, I realized I was talking to 3 of the 4 people in the world that have ever actually built these kinds of fusion reactors, and they did this for the U.S. government. So like these aren't, this isn't a hack job in the back of a garage. Like this is real science, and validated what we thought would be a much better reactor design, and off we went. When there's that high quality of team with that kind of that level of development already done, it's actually not terribly difficult to raise money. And so, I put in a small check and off to the races we went. It was interesting though, because this was actually a UK business and we tried to raise money out here, and it was a terrible experience. We went to the United States and we raised the round in a couple weeks. And yeah, it's hard to overstate how great the ecosystem is in the US for startups compared to the rest of the world.
Interesting. I would like to have that conversation another time. So that's very cool. So what does a defense startup you think need to get right in the first year to really improve its odds of survival?
This might sound obvious, but it doesn't seem to be obvious to a lot of founders in the defense world these days. But there's SBIR Advisors has a really good playbook. These are the same folks that got Palantir, Anduril, Epirus, Shield AI off the ground. And there's a very clear pattern I noticed in the companies that achieved higher revenue targets earlier. And that was starting lobbying and appropriations from day one, basically. That trust building exercise with the US government is not a quick one, and that shouldn't be taken for granted. And the earlier you get that started, it's clear these companies achieve higher revenue targets sooner than their competition. So I think that's one thing that I really try and impress upon the companies I work with, which is get this started day one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could see that, seeing it on our side a little bit of it's a big investment to do that, right? I mean, it's not free. It takes time and capital and expertise. And as you're still trying to figure out what your widget's going to do, your capability, your technology, to be engaged in those conversations is a tough investment pivot, But yeah, I can see it make a huge difference because it's going to help drive the shape where the customer's going, You can help inform them, and, you don't just pop up with something that's like, "Oh, that's neat, but we already got someone doing that," or, whatever.
Well, I mean, they're going to tell you what they need, right? And if you don't make what they need, they're not going to buy it. So you better be in constant contact with your customer.
What's the biggest technical mistake founders make when trying to sell to defense?
It's probably not getting the right compliance done ahead of time. I've watched countless companies with wonderful technology that couldn't run on government networks, for example, and all of a sudden their business hit a wall very quickly because there was no progress made until that was fixed. And that can be a long process sometimes to get approved for those sorts of things. So being diligent about compliance, I know that sounds boring and not fun, but it's an important aspect of doing business with the US government, and getting that right early on makes your life a lot easier as a founder.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also hear, I've heard this a lot, SIBRs are part of this, is dual use concept, But we've also seen some super successful companies that are like, no, I'm defense only. What's your take on that? How do you think about that as an investor?
I mean, it's one of those things where I think it's like sort of a false dichotomy. I mean, I think you're right. Some companies are going to be pure defense. Some companies can be dual use, and it's really just it depends on the nature of the technology and the business itself, whether or not that makes sense. I'd also argue there's a lot of non-defense companies that should be dual use that aren't, in going the other direction. So, whether it's dual use or not doesn't really matter to me. It's just what matters to me if it's the right business with the right model, the right technology, the right angle to achieve that larger outcome. I've seen a lot of companies try to become dual use because their investors say, oh, we need to diversify your revenue, so you need to start doing all this commercial stuff too, when sometimes that doesn't make any sense. So it just depends on the nature of the business itself.
What's the most contrarian belief you hold about where defense innovation is going?
I mean, I spent a lot of my career in space tech, and I view low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, geosynchronous orbit. I view those as the high ground in various ways, polar orbit as well, which is something I think is underutilized. And it's another way of saying my view of it is the US is woefully behind Russia and China in terms of their combined capabilities on orbit. And that's a dangerous, dangerous place for us to be because they can wipe out tons of our infrastructure almost instantaneously if they really wanted to. And we'd be sitting ducks as a result. So I really do think we need to put more emphasis on orbital defense, but also defense from orbit. So, like I said, it's the high ground. We can cache drones on a returnable vehicle that can put drones literally anywhere on the earth in about 15 minutes, but nobody's doing that yet. There's a bunch of like return pod companies that are pretending like they're thinking about doing that, or their investors say they're doing it, but they're not. Like nobody's directly building that yet, and that's something it just frustrates the heck out of me because, I mean that's obvious. That's spiderweb Operation Spiderweb on steroids, basically. The other thing is like, why don't we have a cache on orbit of weapons? Like, why isn't the Rod of God design not been put back into use? I think that it's a really strong point that I don't understand why people are shy of talking about.
How do we fix that?
We need to start investing in those businesses. The hard part is I can count on one hand the number of investors that, really understand that segment. And that's probably why it hasn't happened yet.
Interesting. Let's talk about some of your big wins. Like, tell me about, like 2 companies that, most excited about that were just fascinating that you're like, and they're killing it.
Shout out to Castilian, Brian Hargis and his team. I mean, it is hard to overstate how fast and with integrity that team moves. What they say they're going to do, they get it done, and they get it done 6 weeks ahead of schedule. And they've gone from basically a concept to, live fires of their hypersonic platforms in months, literally. So this is a company that's really proven that they can move in terms of speed and get to manufacturing quick, and then build multiple different products for the US government, like as they need, right? Just because Castilian thinks this is the one great design, that doesn't mean that's what the government wants. And so they've done a great job at really listening to their customer. And that's why I think they've moved so quickly and have grown so fast. So yeah, Brian and his team, big kudos to them. The other one is True Anomaly. They're, I think people like to call them the Andorra of space or something like that. But, Evan Rogers and his team have really taken the lead in orbital defense, which, like I said, we're pretty exposed. So I'm glad they're building in this, and they're building quickly. They're building Predator satellites that can, track down and disable other satellites, and watching orbits. And they really do have an unfair advantage in being, the team that kind of wrote the orbital warfare doctrine for the US government. So who better to put that to practice?
Yeah, those are big names. Were you first checks in both those?
Yep.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, those are big names in the defense space weapons category. Fantastic. How many portcos do you have?
Well, I just launched the fund, so we're not deploying capital yet. We're in process of getting set up. But I've been doing a lot of my own angel investing along the way, so continuing to invest in defense, but going a little bit beyond defense as well. But I just invested in a company that's going to provide subsea obfuscated comms, so submarines never have to surface again, which would be a huge advantage. That there's Tiberius, who's selling smart ramjet assisted 155 and long range strike in Europe, but this is an American team that's doing this. Yeah, there's just like tons of amazing stuff going on. What else? I mean, I could talk about the non-defense stuff, but that's not this crowd. So
No, yeah, those are great examples. There are some really cool things going out there. Hence the reason I do this podcast, because it's fascinating. We're gonna have to start wrapping up. I could sit here for another 3 hours and just be better over a beer, over a pint, but I'm going to give you kind of lightning round, just questions, 30, 60 seconds, what your thoughts are, and we'll just move on. Not necessarily a lot of commentary from me, and you may have already answered this, so just give me a quick answer if you have. So what's the most common mistake you see defense tech founders make?
building without listening to their customers.
What makes you say yes to a defense investment in the first meeting?
If it's the team that has the clear unfair advantage, that's what'll make me say yes.
What do you wish more founders understood about raising capital for defense?
Money is just money. Most of these investors aren't really going to provide much value add, so don't over index on that. Take the money. Is in speed of execution is more important here. Take the money and move.
Where do you see the biggest funding gap in defense tech right now?
I'd probably say orbital defense. I would say that there's just so little funding that's really going into that meaningfully.
Quick follow on that. Is that just because the time it takes to turn an ROI on that? Or why are investors slow on that?
I just don't think they get it.
Oh, okay. Well, Jeff, this has been awesome. Unfortunately, that's all the time we got. But if folks are interested in, connecting with you, they got a great idea. They got the founding team. They think they've got it. How best would they get in touch with you or IceNine?
Yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm pretty active on both. You can always get a hold of me. I think I have my messages open, so it should be easy to reach.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate you joining me. Pleasure meeting you. It's fun how, even just meeting you and you're in London, that our circles intersect with different companies and opportunities. So this has been fun, and I look forward to meeting you in person.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, David.